How does that human cockfighting? You know what that is? That's actual fighting. You know what boxing is? Well, boxing is a very limited form of fighting. It's kind of a silly agreement. Say, like, we hate each other, we're going to fight, we're going to duke it out man to man, but we're only going to use our hands. That's it.
Dana White spent 20 years saying the same thing. Boxing is broken. The best don't fight the best. Champions sit on their belts, duck real competition, and cash checks for showing up. Promoters protect their meal tickets instead of making the fights fans actually want to see. That was the whole pitch. At least in the UFC, you earn everything. Nobody gets a pass. Nobody gets protected. You fight or you're gone. And for a while it was true, and the proof had a name. Conor McGregor. 13 seconds to dethrone Jose Aldo. 1 round to finish Eddie Alvarez and become the first man in UFC history to hold 2 belts at the same time. The trash talk wasn't just noise, it was prophecy. Everything he said would happen, happened. Dana White didn't just have a champion, he had a phenomenon. The kind of star that makes people who've never watched a fight in their life buy a pay-per-view. McGregor wasn't just good for the UFC, he was the UFC. The walking, talking, left-hand throwing proof that this sport was everything boxing wasn't. And that's the problem, because what happens when the proof becomes the contradiction? To understand why McGregor's story matters, beyond just wins and losses, you have to go back to what made him different. He didn't come from a wrestling program or a famous gym. He came from Dublin on welfare checks. And he talked like a man who'd already won. Before the first bell rang, that confidence wasn't an act, it was a weapon. Because when McGregor said he'd knock someone out in the first round, and then he went out and did it, over and over, something happened that almost never happens in combat sports. The audience believed the hype wasn't hype. It was a preview. Aldo finished before the crowd could sit down. Poirier the first time, stopped in the first. Alvarez dismantled so cleanly it looked choreographed. And through all of it, Dana White was beside him, with the biggest grin in the sport, telling every camera and microphone the same story. This is what happens when you let fighters be fighters. This is what happens when the best fight the best. This doesn't happen in boxing. McGregor was more than a champion. He was the brand promise made flesh. He validated everything the UFC claimed to be. But here's the thing about building your entire brand identity around one person. When that person changes, the brand has a choice to make. Tell the truth or protect the investment. The UFC chose the investment. Let's walk through the timeline. Because when you lay it out end to end, it tells a story nobody at the UFC wants to narrate. August 2017. McGregor doesn't defend either of his UFC belts. Instead, he crosses over to boxing to fight Floyd Mayweather. It's a spectacle, it makes a fortune, and it sets a precedent. McGregor can leave the sport whenever he wants, and the UFC will hold. The door opened for him when he comes back. October 2018, he returns to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, gets dominated, submitted in the 4th round. Before and after the fight, there's a bus attack, a brawl, and a post-fight riot. The circus is starting to outweigh the competition. January 2020. After 15 months away, McGregor fights Donald Cerrone, a fan favorite, but a fighter on a clear decline. Cerrone was on a 4-fight losing streak when the UFC handed him to McGregor. It took 40 seconds. It was a statement, sure. But a statement against who? That fight wasn't about proving McGregor was the best. It was about giving him a safe re-entry, a layup disguised as a comeback. And then, 2 more losses to Dustin Poirier in 2021. The second one ending with McGregor on the canvas, with a shattered leg screaming threats, while being loaded onto a stretcher. Since that night in July 2021, Conor McGregor has not thrown a single punch inside the octagon. 5 years. And in those 5 years, something remarkable happened. Nothing changed in how the UFC treated him. His name stayed on every short list. He stayed in the promotional cycle. He kept headlining rumors, press conferences, announcements. He was booked against Michael Chandler, a fight that fans waited over a year for and pulled out 2 weeks before the event. Then came the USADA suspension. 3 missed drug tests in 12 months. 18 months on the sideline, officially this time. And through all of this, the pullouts, the suspensions, the inactivity, the losses, the UFC never once treated McGregor like what he actually was. A part-time fighter with a losing record in the current era. They treated him like the franchise, because he is. And that tells you everything about what the UFC has become. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Go back and listen to every interview Dana White gave between 2005 and 2015 about what's wrong with combat sports. Strip out the names, just listen to the arguments. champions who don't defend their titles, stars who pick their opponents instead of earning them through rankings, promoters who protect their cash cows, an entire industry where the name on the poster matters more than the performance inside the ring. Now ask yourself, who does that sound like in 2026? Conor McGregor has not defended a UFC title since 2016. He's won 3 in his last 4 fights. He's coming off a 5-year layoff and an anti-doping suspension. And on July 11th, he's headlining UFC 329 against Max Holloway. Max Holloway, a former featherweight champion, one of the most active and exciting fighters in the sport. A man who has been in there with Aldo, Poirier, Gaethje, Oliveira, and Qatar. Holloway never stopped competing, never took years off, never failed a drug test. And yet in this fight, he's the B-side. He's the opponent. He exists in this matchup to validate McGregor's relevance. Meanwhile, think about every fighter who fought 4 or 5 times in the years McGregor was absent. Think about the lightweights who kept showing up, kept winning, kept putting their bodies on the line, and never sniffed the kind of payday or platform McGregor gets for simply existing. The rankings say one thing, the business says another, and the UFC chose the business. This isn't a criticism of McGregor specifically. Any fighter in his position would take the same deals. You'd be insane not to. The criticism is aimed at the system. The same system that was supposed to be different from boxing. The one where you earn your spot. The one where there are no protected fighters. That system doesn't exist anymore, if it ever did, and McGregor's career is the clearest timeline of when it stopped pretending. And yet, here's the part that makes this story genuinely fascinating rather than just cynical. Despite everything I just said, despite the layoff, the record, the suspensions, the pullouts, UFC 329 will probably be one of the highest-selling pay-per-views of the year, possibly the decade. Because McGregor isn't just a fighter, he's a narrative. He's the guy who walked into every room like he owned it, and then went out and proved it. People who haven't watched a UFC event in 3 years will buy this card. And that's the trap the UFC built for itself. They need McGregor more than McGregor needs them. Here's the thing that nobody wants to admit. If McGregor wins on July 11th, if he knocks out Holloway, does the strut, grabs the microphone, and delivers. The kind of post-fight moment that breaks the internet. One punch rewrites the entire story. McGregor goes from washed-up comeback to the greatest, and Dana White gets to stand at the post-fight press conference and say what he's always said. See? This is why the UFC is the greatest sport in the world. But if McGregor loses, if the layoff shows, if the age shows, if the miles on the body show, then for 5 years, the UFC sold its audience. A main event it knew was built on nostalgia, not merit. And they did it because the alternative, admitting that their biggest star's best days are behind him, was too expensive, too honest, too much like the truth. And that's the real story, isn't it? Not whether McGregor wins or loses. The real story is that the UFC decided the answer to that question didn't matter. The fight got made either way. The pay-per-view sells either way. The machine keeps running either way. Dana White built the UFC by telling fans they'd never have to choose between spectacle and legitimacy. That in this sport, they were the same thing. Conor McGregor's return is the moment we find out if that was ever true.